Hey, Rising Church, welcome to another round of Groves as we kind of continue this series, The Shepherd's Guide, kind of following, not always exactly, but kind of following the road trip I took around the country for my sabbatical and kind of sharing some of the stories and some of the insights that kind of really, if you look at them in a different perspective, actually kind of point towards biblical truths. And so today we're going to be taking our road trip from Texas. I think last week we ended up in Arkansas and in the deep part of Texas. And today we're going to be moving up to New Mexico to Carlsbad Cavern National Park, which, if you don't know, is a pretty massive cavern, just kind of deep in there. It's pretty spectacular when you get there. It's in the middle of the desert, and so you go down into this cave way below the earth. And it does actually have some interesting history that I think kind of ties in maybe to some of our experiences that we'll talk about in a second. But one of the things I've noticed about wherever I was going is out west, there's kind of like there's claims. People make claims on the land because they discover gold or they discover silver or they find some gold strike. And so they would make their claim, and then they would kind of be able to bring out these precious materials out of the earth and get rich. And so you kind of see a lot of these ghost towns all over Nevada and California, New Mexico, Arizona, where the people would find these things, and then they would kind of bring up all the earth, and then it would run out, and then they would move on, and there would be a ghost town left because the town kind of grew up because of the precious materials. So what happened in the story when it comes to Carlsbad Caverns is there was kind of a settler. I don't know if you would call him a settler, but he was out of the army after the Civil War, and so he was in the late 1800s, and he was kind of assigned somewhere near Carlsbad, New Mexico. And so he was out at dusk riding his horse around out in the middle of nowhere. And in the distance, he saw like this black cloud kind of billowing up from the earth. And so he thought it was a fire. He thought it was like smoke. This is the smoke rising up from the earth. And so he was curious, went closer and discovered it was not smoke rising up from a fire. It was actually bats. Thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of bats. I don't know how many, that's maybe an exaggeration, but a lot of bats. So much so that they formed like this dark cloud coming out of the earth that looked like smoke from the distance. And so he was very curious and was like, well, where are they coming out of? And so he started, kind of going down to the exit of where these bats were going out. And basically what he discovered is what we now today know as Carlsbad Cavern. Interestingly enough, he kind of wasn't really into making money. He just kind of was exploring the cave, and he would kind of go down in there, and he discovered all kinds of just beautiful cave formations and everything else. And there was a businessman who kind of heard about this, and so he decided to come in and make a claim on the land around there because he realized, what one of the number one fertilizers, the richest nitrate, just richest fertilizer is in the world is guano. If you don't know what guano is, it's bat, what, right? And if you do the math on this, it's kind of a crazy thing that scientists have studied these bats. These are Brazilian something bats, and they like 25 times a day after they go out and they eat all these insects. And so most of these bats live for 10 years, and this has been going on in this cave for all of time. And so the entire cave is just layered in guano. And so when this guy kind of laid his claim, his plan was actually to not dig out gold or silver like in a traditional mine. He was literally digging out the bat doo-doo. You know what I mean? That's what he was doing, the guano. And they would lower this bucket 170 feet down into the earth. They would bag it all up. They would bring it up to the surface. They would send it off to Carlsbad, the nearby city, where it would get on trains going to Southern California and all over the country. If you drank orange juice from Southern California in the 1910s, that was fertilized with the guano from Carlsbad Caverns. And that was how they were making all kinds of money. It's kind of a crazy thought. Right? When we think of gold, we think of precious treasure. We think of these riches. We think of, again, gold, silver, these kinds of things, copper. But this treasure was actually guano. So you're like, okay, Aaron, that's a great story. How does that relate to us? I want to share a passage, which was one that I kind of spent a lot of time thinking about. It's 2 Corinthians. It's from 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and you're going to be reading it, but he says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. That's an interesting thought, right? And then he says, just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also we share in his comfort through Christ. If we are troubled, basically, it's for your benefit. If we are comforted, it's for your benefit. And so that's not exactly it, but you guys will read it. But this idea is that some of the stuff that we go through, the hard things, the guano, it actually can become a treasure because it forms something deep down inside of us and we get through it and God walks us through it and he comforts us through it. And that's what enables us to comfort others, it says, in any trouble that they're going through, because we've received comfort from him. And so now we know how to comfort others. And so kind of these dark parts of our lives, they can be redeemed because it allows us to be able to speak into other people's lives to help them through their stuff. And you don't think of that as being a treasure. You think of that as just being not good stuff, right? But it can actually be very rich. And it actually becomes this fertilizer for things to grow from in other people's lives. And it's interesting because I don't think we like to say this, but he says, like, our sufferings, like we have these sufferings and we suffer because Jesus suffered. And so we each kind of have our own cup of suffering that we go through in life, and everybody's is going to be different. We don't all get the same stuff, but God can redeem those things if we will allow him to use it to be able to be these things that we can now comfort and help others. So even when I go through a tough thing, it actually helps me to comfort somebody through something else. If I'm comforted because of he comforts me, then now that enables me to come alongside. That's what the word means, encourage, come alongside from being in close relationship and help somebody else. And so I just think it's a different perspective on how we can view some of our trials and tribulations, some of the things from our upbringing or our past or our childhood or things that have happened to us that we just think those things are just, it's guano. But if we will look at it differently, that can become a treasure in our life later on that we can now help other people through stuff. And so there's just something, I think, rich about that idea. That, again, the things that we think just horrible, smelly, whatever, it's like it is the excrement, you know what I mean? That it actually can be redeemed and bring something beautiful out of it. So we're going to be talking about this a little bit more, but that's kind of my little story from Carlsbad Cavern. It's a crazy place. You actually hike down into it and you descend. If you go in the natural cave entrance, you actually go down 700 and something feet, the same height as the Empire State Building, down into the earth, and you explore and just see these beautiful rock formations. They had one called Rock of Ages. It's just this huge rock formation, and you can have this little spot where you can sit and you just want to sing the song Rock of Ages. You know, I mean, Cleft for Me, if you know the song. So just there's a lot of richness in the depths of the earth, in the depths of our lives, that if we mind those things, we can bring up some good stuff. So just a thought. And we will check back in with you next week.